Hello, and welcome to the Artificial Podcast, with your host Nick Myers.
Artificial
intelligence,
voice recognition, machine learning,
robotics,
actionable analytics.
It is Nick's goal to help everyone understand how AI and voice technology are reshaping our lives both personally and within organizations. Your glimpse into the growing world of AI and voice first starts now.
Nick Myers.
Nick Myers. Nick Myers.
Nick Myers.
Welcome to the Artificial Podcast. My name is Nick Myers, and I am here to help break down topics in emerging technology, artificial intelligence, and voice assistant tech to help everyone understand how these technologies are impacting our lives both personally and within our organizations. The Artificial Podcast is brought to you by Red Fox AI. Red Fox AI helps give brands a voice by leveraging the power of AI and voice assistant technologies like Alexa and Google Assistant. If you or your organization is interested in sponsoring an episode, please send an email to the Artificial Podcast at redfox-ai.com. If you like what you hear, please subscribe and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or anywhere that you stream podcast episodes. You can also follow the Artificial Podcast on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube by searching for the Artificial Podcast. You can join our brand new Facebook group exclusively for listeners of the show, where you can meet other artificial podcasters from around the world who are interested in emerging technology just like you. A link to our Facebook group has been included in the episode notes. Thank you for listening, and now a quick word from our sponsors before we jump into this week's episode. Hey, Brett.
What's up, Nick?
You know, on the Artificial Podcast, we talk a lot about the future of conversational AI and voice assistant technologies, right?
So you mean basically in every episode we do?
All right, wise guy. But seriously, think about it. I don't think we truly realize how quickly voice assistants like Alexa, Google Assistant, Siri, Cortana, and Bixby, just to name a few, have embedded themselves in our daily lives. I mean, the analysts are predicting that in a little more than 3 years, there will likely be 8 billion, yes, billion, voice assistant users connected to nearly 2 billion global websites, more than 40 billion connected devices.
Okay, yeah, that's a lot. But what are you trying to get here, basically?
Well, I guess what I'm trying to say is that for numbers like these to truly become a reality, a few things need to happen.
Yeah, like more technology innovations?
Well, yes, but I'm thinking of something more, something even more important. We need to have trust. Trust between the users and the technology itself.
Okay, yeah, I'll be honest. Sometimes I daydream about these voice assistants getting smart enough to rise up and take over like Skynet, from Terminator.
Well, I mean, yeah, sure, that could happen, I suppose, but I'm talking about things like trustworthy privacy and trustworthy accessibility and trust that if you're a business, you have full rights to your name and your brand. Have you heard about the Open Voice Network?
No, I haven't. Can you tell me a little bit more about them?
I would love to, Brett. Well, in a nutshell, the Open Voice Network is a non-profit directed fund of the Linux Foundation that is dedicated to making voice assistants worthy of user trust. Members of the Open Voice Network include conversational AI designers, strategists, developers, and other industry professionals from all around the world who are dedicated to paving the way for a future where voice can be trusted and benefits everyone. I'm proud to say that I've been a member since early this year, and it has truly been one of the best decisions I have made since becoming a voice practitioner. And if you're in the industry, I highly encourage you to check it out and join.
Sweet. That sounds cool. So what you're saying is Skynet isn't going to happen?
Oh, Brett.
If you are interested in learning more about the Open Voice Network and how you can get involved, visit www.openvoicenetwork.org or send an email to john.stein@openvoicenetwork.org. The Open Voice Network. Voice assistants worthy of user trust.
Hey there, Artificial Podcasters. Welcome back to another week and another episode of the Artificial Podcast. This week, I am excited to welcome Emerson Sklar from Bespoken.io to the Artificial Podcast. And Emerson and I have been talking for quite some time now. We both work in the Open Voice Network together. Emerson is working on some really interesting things on the ethics side. of voice technology. I've gotten to see him. I saw him speak at Project Voice in January of this year as well, on ethics. So he's working on a lot of really interesting things in the voice technology space, and knows a ton about QA and testing and some of that. And we'll dive into that in this episode. But before Emerson and I start chatting, let me tell you a bit more about Emerson Sklar. Emerson is the chief evangelist of Bespoken. Emerson has spent most of his career working in the QA space, including the Army Research Lab, Borland, and Applause. Emerson is passionate about the impact that effective testing can have on products and users. He loves working for Bespoken because it makes voice development so much faster, easier, and more fun. And the llama is pretty cool too. That's something I'll have to ask him about. Outside of Bespoken, Emerson loves adventure cycling, cooking, and volunteering with the Scouts BSA. Emerson, welcome to the Artificial Podcast. How are you?
I'm very well, Nick. Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
Absolutely. So, like I just kind of, as I was reading off your bio, the llama. So I know the llama is kind of the logo of Bespoken, but is there any other info around that or anything interesting?
Sure. Yeah. Our CEO, when he was looking to actually found Bespoken, decided to move to Peru with his wife and his daughter, and began the company actually down from Lima and the surrounding area.
Yeah.
And Peru actually has an extraordinary untapped technical market. A lot of great technical schools, a lot of really incredible development resources. And like many other places, and like many other companies, having a distributed native organization, really works very, very well for our type of development, and very well for the particular team that we have.
That's fascinating.
And
that's fascinating. So then that makes sense why the llama is the logo.
Yep.
That's awesome. So now that we're kind of past that, so what has your journey been like so far working in the world of QA, and how did that ultimately lead you to the voice technology space, having worked in QA and testing for some time?
Sure, yeah. I went to West Virginia University, and at the end of my junior year, going into senior year, actually decided to found a video game development startup with some former colleagues of mine. We were working on the ever-evolving Xbox platform, and that really was my first introduction to the need for testing, specifically in this case, automated testing, with a system as complex as the one that we were trying to design. It became a significant challenge, significant time sink for me to spend all of my time manually testing some of these small changes I might introduce. And it wasn't something that perhaps it's different in computer science programs now, but automation was not something that they had taught us back then. So it was a really, really interesting learning opportunity. And then so after that, I went and spent sort of the first section of my career working for the Army Research Lab and Army INSCOM, the Intelligence Security Command. And so those both were really interesting, very, very different types of products, obviously very different from the video game world, but had hypercritical use cases supporting people both domestically and internationally. And so ensuring that everything worked perfectly all the time was paramount. So that really was the beginning of my experience doing QA, again, in that case, automated testing full time. After Army INSCOM, we actually used an SDLC optimization suite. It's called an ALM, Application Lifecycle Management Suite, created by a company, Borland, who perhaps the old hats in the audience will remember Borland from the Turbo C and Turbo Pascal days. But we actually used it at Army INSCOM, and after some time managing the implementation of those tools, I joined the Borland team to help other organizations and other government agencies across the country, have that same kind of success. Spent a long time at Borland, spent about four years there, and ran into a lot of challenges in the GUI world, in the web and mobile GUI world, that automation just couldn't solve. And so when a number of colleagues and friends of mine joined a company, Applause, it seemed a really, really interesting opportunity. And so for people that don't know Applause, they're the leaders in crowdsourced testing. And so their ability to do, to really augment any kind of individual development team's capabilities was incredible. And so Applause really started in the web and space. They do omni-channel stuff now, certainly. But several years ago, one of my counterparts at Applause, Ben Anderson, sort of dragged me kicking and screaming into the voice world. I will admit that I came into it late, and am ever grateful to Ben for how much I enjoy living and breathing in the voice space now. And so Ben and I then spent a few years at Applause starting the voice practice from the ground up, figuring out what can we do when we have almost 500,000 professional QA people all over the world. How can we use that for voice? And so one thing from having that kind of capability, which really is unique to that organization, one thing that became apparent the more time I spent with voice is that there are a lot of unique challenges to voice where it is either impossible or prohibitively expensive or prohibitively slow to try and do it purely from a manual perspective.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that was how I met John Kelby, is the CEO of Spoken. That's how I met the rest of the team, and now I'm here.
Fantastic! What a really cool story, and I just love how it really is just you kind of bouncing from QA project to testing project in so many different industries, especially the Army. Like, what was it like working on a project for the U.S. Army in that capacity?
I could tell you, but then I'd have to kill you. No, that's a joke. It was fascinating. I will say that both the Army Research Lab and Army INSCOM have some of the best toys that I've ever seen.
Oh, I'm sure.
I never had the privilege of contributing to. So for INSCOM, like my last project, I was working on something called the Distributed Common Ground System, which is a way to get either using domestic supercomputers or perhaps even deployable supercomputers to get real-time, world-leading intelligence analysis for people in not so pleasant locations.
Wow!
And so the thing there was not finding a needle in a haystack, because for a $1 zillion supercomputer, a needle in a haystack is pretty easy. It's finding the needle in the stack of needles. And I had no experience, no exposure to the intelligence analysis side, and so it was fascinating to work with world-class leaders kind of in that space, and was really the first time that I had ever worked or contributed to something where potentially people's lives were on the line. And so if you have a system that is non-performant, or a system that takes an extra couple seconds or extra couple minutes, it could be pretty serious.
Wow.
But that
sounds like a heavy project.
Really interesting. Spent a lot of time at a number of different military bases all over the East Coast, and still keep in contact with a lot of people back from that world. That project and capability is still critical and important to the Army's activities, and it really just a very, very different testing, both manual and automated testing, very, very different needs from almost any other kind of project I've worked on since.
Yeah, I can imagine. Well, and I can only just also only imagine the different type of experience that gave you that I assume you've been able to carry over into the work that you did with Applause and now Bespoken, which kind of leads me into something else I want to chat about quick here. So when it comes to QA and creating a great customer experience for users, of any technology, really, what are some of the most common misconceptions? What is QA? What isn't QA? I think, depending on what industry you're in, QA can get a bit ambiguous, but maybe let's look at it from the perspective of just technology. And maybe if you even want to dive into a bit of that on the voice side quick, what is QA? What isn't QA?
Sure. Yeah. Well, in terms of misconceptions, I think there are three that we see pretty frequently, not just with people that we interact with, but across the general technology landscape and across specifically voice. So the first is that QA has to be hard. And that definitely is not true. And it's not to say it is not complex, but it does not have to be so hard to rigorously and effectively implement. One misconception is that it has to be perfect. And that, I think all of us have seen that even the best voice apps are not totally perfect.
Right.
But it has to be sufficient. It doesn't need to be perfect, but it has to be sufficient. And then the other one, and this is a big holdover from, I think, the web and mobile development worlds, is that QA really shouldn't be done by developers, or doesn't need to be done by developers. Mm-hmm. And so if you think about those things, and think about the words themselves, quality assurance, if you think about an end-to-end process that's going to guarantee a customer experience, why wouldn't you want to involve everyone in that process? Developers, right, testers, business analysts, subject matter experts, whatever it may be. So that, I think, is a big, represents a shift that we are seeing actually a little bit now, as people start to understand that it should be a more kind of holistic, integrated process between each of the disparate teams.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. And I'll be honest, when I first entered this industry, I actually thought QA was more on, and forgive my ignorance, but I thought it was more on the development side myself. And then I really started thinking about it more as I began designing more of the different voice apps that we were creating. And I would talk with our CTO about it. I'm like, not only should it be you involved in the process, but me as well. And then when we beta test, as many different people as possible. And that's
Certainly.
really kind of changed our whole outlook on the QA thing. And I'll be honest, to your point earlier, where it's really hard to QA voice applications to some extent, because it's so much different from anything from the web and mobile, and there's just, of course, no visual user interface. That the more people you have in that process, the much better it's going to become, albeit at how much sometimes it can be a pain in the ass manually, for sure.
Right.
And that's, of course, why, when you started telling me about Bespoken and I started looking more into it, I'm like, my gosh, this is this is a lifesaver. And I'm sure you've gotten the same feedback from people who've used the platform too, because it's such a, there's been moments where our CTO and myself were sitting there, we're QA testing something for at least a good hour or two, and I'm like, I just want to bash my head into the desk.
Oh, absolutely. We hear, I'm sure we'll talk about the, benefits of having a better apps and all of that, but even just from the quality of life improvement that having something like this can introduce, it pays extraordinary dividends. I think everybody who has, written even very, very simple voice apps, everybody has felt the exact pain that you described of reading the same script over and over again until your voice gets hoarse. That is a notable shift from the web and mobile world, from the GUI world, where that, the tedium and the fatigue that the conversational nature of these platforms introduces, just makes it not that fun to read that same script over and over.
Right. And, especially too, when we're trying to test something, whether it be on Alexa or Google Assistant, and you're constantly listening to Alexa read off the same exact script, or Google, and then you realize, okay, we need to add an utterance there, or the voice just sounds so far off what you want it to be, and you're like, do we want to put an SSML tag in there? It's a brain buster. So yeah, I think, anybody who specifically works in voice, who may have also worked in maybe, web QA or mobile QA or anything like that, it's just entirely different compared to any of those, which may be a good time now to transition into, if you want to maybe go into what is Bespoken and how does the platform assist with QA for voice apps. I'm interested in learning more about it myself.
Sure, yeah. So we are the global leader of automated testing, training, tuning, and monitoring for conversational AI experiences. We make it as easy and painless and cost effective as possible for everybody, technical people, non-technical people, and everybody in between, to make sure that they're releasing 5-star voice apps. And our motto is, if you can talk to it, then we can test it.
Nice.
We have a sort of flexible mechanism to support really any kind of conversational platform under the sun. We recognize in that space that with Amazon and Google, we work with tons of really interesting giant brands, people like Mercedes, Roku, Spotify, Ford, as well as lots of very, very small organizations or even individual developers. And if you think about, how do we assist with that process for voice QA? We've talked about removing some of that tedium. We talked about the pain of chanting the same utterances over and over again. And we really bring to the table not only those classic type benefits that you get from investing in automation. So, much greater speed, increased scale for your team, increased reliability, cost savings versus doing it manually. But it also then drives and calls out a ton of really, really interesting use cases and benefits that are totally unique to the conversational world.
Yeah, and I think too, because of course I've been on the website and from some of our past conversations, Bespoken does this automatically, right? Like it's not like you have people sitting in a room like verbally testing, and maybe you do, but it seems like the big advantage here is the automated part of it, right?
Yeah, we have sort of two different ways that we support the automation. So we have a virtual device solution and a physical device solution.
Gotcha.
Pros and cons depending on the particular use case. But you can think of, like, if I talk to an Echo that I have sitting on my desk, I say some utterance, the Echo records that audio, it sends it up to AVS, AVS says something, and then it sends back a response. Our platform is exactly the same as that, except we're cutting out a person talking to a physical device, and we're cutting out the physical device talking back to a real person.
Gotcha.
So we let people do it without ever opening their mouths. We let people write test scripts that look very much like the manual to the scripts you may have written already, look very much like the documentation that you already have, and then let you run those and interact with the platforms in this kind of programmatic manner without ever talking to a device.
That's awesome. I'm just thinking about that now with some of the stuff that we've worked on in the past, and I'm like, I wish I almost kind of would have known about it more in the past, because I'm like, my gosh, all the time that could have been saved in the tears and the head banging and the wanting to toss my devices out the window. Not really, but you get where I'm going with that. But, I know, and anybody who works in voice has experienced this, especially if you're building something incredibly robust with different integrations, different functionalities, scripts that are pages long. It's hard. It's so hard.
Absolutely.
And QA really is, when you look at the whole design and development process of a voice application, I personally view QA as the most important part, because that is where you determine, is this thing good enough to be used by somebody? Is this the quality of work that we want to publish for somebody else to use? It is the most important part, in my opinion. And I don't know what your experience is with this. Does it seem like a lot of people, within voice technology, outside of voice technology, put a strong emphasis on QA, or is it still one of those afterthoughts for a lot of people?
Well, I think unfortunately, and I think this is reflected in ratings on the skill marketplace. I think it's reflected in the slightly declining utilization of custom skills that people have created. I think unfortunately not enough companies put that kind of emphasis on quality of the product. Yeah. And it's quality in the voice world is again very different from quality in the GUI driven web and mobile world. And so you could have something that functions perfectly. Your backend systems could all be great. If I say what's 2 + 2, it gives me out 4 or something like that. But if I have perhaps an odd accent, or maybe I tested it only with men's voices and I didn't test to see how it performs with a woman's voice, or I only used my personal colloquialisms. Again, you could have a perfectly functioning app, but it can be a terrible customer experience.
Right.
And I think again, there's some stellar products out there on the markets today, both first and third party applications on these platforms. And I think really the solution to get all of the other apps that are out there on the markets today to be that same kind of high performant is a focus on quality, and specifically with regards to voice is a focus on automation.
Oh, absolutely. And that was one of the points too I wanted to bring up that you answered is, do you think better QA is the solution to this growing, I don't necessarily want to call it a problem, but it definitely is, there's a growing pot of subpar experiences that are currently available, to your point about the reviews that currently exist on the skills store, that are available for these platforms. So, and it sounds like, you're saying that QA and developing more applications that take quality into account versus just let's get something out there is the way to make that better. And I agree with you. I think, I almost view creating a voice app these days, and hopefully I don't sound like I'm totally granola here. There's an art to it, right?
Oh, absolutely.
There's an art to the design, there's an art to the development, and there's even an art to the testing and the QA, because it's so much different than anything that we've had with the visual interface, which maybe this is a good time to jump over to this. How does the testing process for voice differ or compare to GUIs and graphical user interfaces? Are there any big similarities that you've noticed, the hardcore differences? What are some things that you can speak to maybe there?
Sure, yeah. So if at an absolute high level, a huge difference is that these systems that we're all developing for are AI driven. Mm-hmm. And so they're constantly evolving. Sometimes, Amazon and Google do a really great job of telling people what those changes are and giving them a heads up. Sometimes, they may not give people a heads up. And sometimes it's not even somebody at those companies manually introducing changes again, because it's right. AI driven evolution. It also then, represents a shift in how people develop and design applications, which, introduces some risk and some complexity to even very mature engineering teams that had a lot of experience in the GUI world. And so, we at Spoken have three different primary categories of services that we have really created to address three sets of challenges that are very much unique to voice. So the first of those is just testing. Functional testing, again, kind of replacing what a human might have to do manually. So with the testing world, we've talked about how stuff progresses at the speed of human speech.
Yeah.
Every team, even if you're Amazon and Google, every team has limitations in their capabilities to actually interact with these experiences, based on their vocal profiles, based on devices that they have, based on their availability. Brett Kinsella of VoiceBot has a great quote that I stole from him years ago, where he said that everybody's thumbs are the same, but everybody's voices are different.
Yeah, that's a great quote.
Yeah, so you and I could test a rhythm exactly the same. We're going to have the exact same experience. We're not going to have the exact same experience on a voice app. The other part of testing is that because it progresses at the speed of human speech, there's no magic bullet to go faster than that. These platforms listen at human speech speed; they respond back to you at human speech speed. So it ends up being, for a lot of organizations, very expensive to test the truly infinite number of combinations that you could test of how somebody's going to interact with it.
Yeah, that I'm glad you pointed out that big difference, because that's something that's always stood out to me, is at least when you're testing a mobile app or even a website, there's kind of these paths we developed with that we typically develop with wireframing, and we're always trying to guide somebody somewhere. But with voice, we kind of have an idea, of course, where we want them to go in the conversation, but because, to your point of the infinite number of ways you can say something, we don't know if that's actually going to happen. And that is one of the hardest things to predict. I mean, I'll tell you, Emerson, writing out utterance lists and testing those, and I mean, I feel like there's sometimes we just spend hours coming up with different utterances because it's like, oh, there's a different way to say this. Okay, well, we didn't consider this. And then when we go to beta testing, somebody else says something that we never could have predicted. And it's just kind of feels like this game of round robin until, the point you made earlier where it doesn't have to be perfect, but sufficient enough. It works well enough to accomplish the goal we set it out to accomplish.
And you actually hit on some of the challenges for that sort of second tier of the second category of different services that we have, which is the tuning and training. And so in the voice world, very, very much different from the GUI world, we really are quite beholden to the NLP capabilities of whatever our chosen platform is. And so let's say you want to release in a market that Amazon just expanded to, and their language support exists, but perhaps it's limited because it's just the first version. You really can't go to them and force them to record thousands of hours of utterances and ingest it into their data model and fix it. So again, you can have that kind of really functional app, but still a very bad customer experience. And one of the things that I've seen through my entire career in QA is that customers do not compartmentalize quality. So you're technical, I'm technical. We know about the voice world. We might know, it's not our screw up. It's Alexa screw up, or it's Google screw up, or something. It has nothing to do with the app itself. A real person, a user, is not going to know that. They're just going to know it doesn't work.
Right.
And in specific to Alexa and Google, which are obviously the two biggest players, we see some people just throw up their hand and they say, well, there's nothing I can do. I can't fix it. But typical skills and actions start at between 75 to 80% successful speech recognition accuracy. And so you might think about that and say, okay, well, like, it's 75 to 80% accurate. Like, that's pretty good. And like, no, it's actually really terrible. If 1 out of 4 or 1 out of 5 utterances that I say is fundamentally not understood, that's a bad experience.
That's a huge variance. Yeah.
Yeah, take it from a mobile app and you click on a button and 1 out of 4 times the button just doesn't work. I mean, that's frustrating. And so what we try to do on that tuning and training side is, leverage this infinitely scalable capability that we have to find data-driven, repeatable, and statistically significant ways to drive up that speech recognition accuracy as high as possible. And we typically try to target 95 to 98 or 99%. 100% is not realistic for any non-trivial application, but there is an extraordinary impact on the end users, and as well as an extraordinary impact on the teams that are trying to kind of put these band-aids on and trying to figure out why someone's particular utterance didn't have the right result. It's just it's just something that is, again, not really feasible or is prohibitively expensive and time expensive to try and do manually.
Yeah, and to the point you mentioned as well about users not necessarily compartmentalizing the issues, they just see an issue and they like throw their hands up in the air like, oh, well, this is crap. Well, I'm not going to use it anymore. That's one of the big things that I think a lot of people in voice encounter now. It's like, at least with a graphical user interface, you can see more on the screen. So maybe there's the off chance if a button doesn't work or something isn't functioning right, the user can, migrate over to some other portion of the app or the website. You can't really do that with voice. Well, maybe you can, but it's not the same experience if I'm explaining this correctly, because it's like, you're trying to engage in that natural conversation as the user. If it doesn't understand, you're like, oh, well, it probably doesn't understand anything else I say, and then you're done. At least that's some of the experience I've had with some of the beta testing we've had, and trying to get even folks in my family and other friends to do some testing for us. That's typically the reaction. So I can imagine it's the reaction across the board with a lot of users, but that even puts should put more importance on should put more emphasis and importance on the QA part of the whole design development process. And that's what I think is really fascinating about what Bespoken offers as well, is you really try and hone in on the NLP and understanding certain utterances, so you continually inch that bar up so you can really have that robust conversation, which, again, as I mentioned a bit earlier, the whole utterance part of it is just I've gone to the bottle sometimes over that. So
Yeah, no, I mean, I think to give you an example, we did a project recently with a Canadian utility company that was making a smarter IVR system for power outage reporting, and we did really interesting stuff there. But for this the training and tuning, we reduced their speech recognition errors by almost 50%.
Wow.
And so for somebody like that, if there is some kind of emergency, let's say there's a fire or some kind of critical power outage, and you have tens of thousands of people in the major metro trying to report at the same time, that even a minor change means significant delta in spend to support those users, let alone in this case, almost a 50% change.
Wow, that's that. Well, and especially in a case like that too, where you want that to be as accurate as possible. Like, you don't want to screw around with somebody reporting, emergencies such as fire or anything like that. Like you want that to work 100%. That's really cool. That's really neat.
I would say that the challenge, though, and then this speaks to the that third set of challenges in the voice space, is that you could have properly tested your app. You could have done extraordinary NLP tuning. It could really perfectly understand people. But what we see is that, again, these platforms are constantly evolving and constantly changing, and things break, start working, go up and down without people knowing. And so it's great that you tested it last week and that it worked fine. And in the GUI world, like if you develop an iPhone app and you release it, you're pretty well assured it's going to behave the same way a month from now, 3 months from now, until there's a new OS revision. But you don't know, even from an hour-to-hour, day-to-day basis, how these voice apps are going to perform. And so people need a way, again, a cost-effective way to be able to get real-time or as close to real-time insight and notification if something goes wrong without needing somebody to sit in front of one of these smart speakers to find out.
Yes, which again, for all of you designers out there and even developers who are working on these things, who dread the QA process, like anything that can help shave off time is incredibly valuable. So yeah, no, that's incredible stuff that you're working with there at Bespoke and Emerson. So what are some of the best, maybe 1 to 2, let's say, what are 1 or 2 of the best QA testing tips or strategies that you can share with voice designers and developers?
Ooh, 1 to 2. That's going to be tough. Let's see. Okay, so the first would be to start automated testing day one. As soon as you put, I would say pen to paper, as soon as you put hand to keyboard to start doing some development. So we actually offer completely free tools to enable people to do local debugging of their voice apps, to enable them to do unit testing of the voice apps, completely free, super easy to get started with that. And that immediately, I mean, literally the first day that you are developing, you will see how much faster that makes the cycle of making a fix or making a change, deploying it up to the cloud, waiting a couple minutes for it to build, doing some testing. It wipes that out. The end-to-end automated testing, this sort of simulating a human talking to a device, that part you do need. You need a conversational model. You need something that it can actually talk through. But as soon as, as just like with unit testing, as soon as you see yourself actually talking to something, talking to a smart speaker, talking to a mobile app, it's worth writing an automated test for it. The other, so that's sort of a double, but I'll count that as my first one. The second, and this is just a fun little trick that makes development easier, is cleverly creating, designing your production version as well as a pre-production version of your voice app. So if you have a pre-production version, and that's from just software engineering best practices, best to make changes on that before you push it to what's going live. what most people do now is they have those pre-production versions, but it's named the exact same thing as the production version. And so you get stuck because if you're trying to invoke it from, from one account, it sometimes you don't know which one it's going to give back. Or sometimes it's just going to give back the wrong one. And so if you are working on a skill, if it is going to be something that's sufficiently complex that you're going to have, changes and you would need a pre-production version, then creating that and naming it something that's very, very similar, but distinct enough, means that you don't have to do a lot of changes to your test cases, and means that one person with one device and one Amazon or Google account can test both experiences without having to swap back and forth.
That is a fun little tip. I'm going to be writing that one down. Well, because it's something, as you're in that process, that definitely is something I know I've never thought about, but that makes a ton of sense now that you've fleshed it out, is how it can make the entire process more efficient in the long run. No, those are excellent tips, Emerson. Thank you so much for sharing those. So,
and I like to say that that the best developers are lazy, not that they're not doing work, but a good developer is going to want to find the most efficient and least way possible to get a task done and get it done right or get it done sufficiently, and that's great. I mean, that should be encouraged, and this is a great opportunity for that kind of benefit.
Absolutely. No, I think that is an excellent way to put it, is if you're laziness is, if you're trying to, not cut corners in a bad way, but what are the words I'm looking for here? To your point, the best developer is lazy, as you're trying to make your entire process more efficient. So I totally get that. I like that a lot. I'm stumbling for words here because I'm trying to figure out how to sum that up, but I think what you said pretty much just paints a very accurate picture of that. And that's exactly how our CTO is too. He's always like, Nick, I found a more efficient way to do this. I'm like, good, saves you time. And he's like,
right.
Wait, doesn't that mean I'm, not putting in as much work, Laura? I'm like, nope, that means you're saving us time and money. So do it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So how long should the typical QA process take for voice applications? I know there probably isn't one right answer across the board for this, but from what you've seen, how long should the typical QA process take for your standard voice application?
Yeah, that's a good question. There are, like you said, there's huge variation, both as a result of the platforms themselves and the types of products that people are creating. I think we see two different types of teams. Typically, we see companies that have a real voice team and have a couple people on the team that are focused on manual testing. And so their focus or their activities really are limited just by the amount of time that they have, and they often will spend 100% of that time trying to do this testing. The other thing we see is teams that have nobody who's a tester, but they have several developers, and the developers have an end-to-end responsibility for quality. So one thing that makes it a challenge is that again, it's input and output from these platforms can only progress at the speed of human speech. And so there's no way to magically bypass it. And as we've said, there are infinite combinations. That doesn't mean that you need to test the infinite combinations. And it doesn't mean that you should be limited to number of people times number of speakers equals how much output I can get. You can, with manual testing, you can buy a whole lot more devices and put more boots and feet and have people talking to more devices in parallel. With automation, you can, we're not limited by a number of devices, so you can have, virtually limitless number of virtual devices, where again, like each individual test, each individual interaction is going to still be that same human speech speed, but you can bring down the end-to-end process of running all of your regression tests, running some monitoring scripts, all of that. You can bring it down to whatever makes sense for the business, right? So if it's a trivial thing, very, very simple app, it doesn't make sense necessarily to invest that time and energy. But if it's something that's mission critical, if it's something that is key for your brand, and you need very, very prompt insight across a large number of tests, then you're going to find a way to bring down that QA cycle length as
Yeah.
much as possible.
Yeah, and I think that's ultimately the goal of most voice designers and developers. It's how efficient can we make the QA process so we don't spend hours and hours and hours and hours and hours on this. As important as those hours may be, you still want to allocate some time to other areas of what you're designing and developing. You don't want QA to
Right.
eat up that whole thing, as important as it is. But the more efficient you can make that process while hitting on the major milestones and testing the major pieces of functionality, I think that really is the most valuable and the best system to adopt. And again, using automated tools like Bespoken to help cut down on that time, allows you to focus on other areas of what you're actually building to make it a truly robust application. So, I think what you summed up there is pretty good. So one of the things as we kind of wind our conversation down here, I know that in our last conversation before we recorded, you wanted to touch on is IVR systems. So do you still think there is a place for IVR in this growing ecosystem of voice platforms? I mean, and for those who may not necessarily be familiar with IVR, those are the systems that you use. Say you call into your local cable company and it's the prompts, or really any customer service system, right, Emerson? I mean, that's where we see these for the most part.
Absolutely.
So how do you think existing IVR platforms can be brought up to speed to match other modern day, NLP systems, let's compare that to like Alexa, the Google Assistants of the world.
Sure. Yeah. So it's funny. IVR is actually in many respects doing much better and getting much more significant investments than the sort of modern style of voice that we think of so often.
Which I thought when you told me that, I thought that was pretty fascinating.
Yeah, and it's there are the names for what looks like, so people call it smart IVR, modern IVR, conversational IVR, or IVA, interactive voice assistant. Most large enterprises are either in process already or planning in the near and midterm to modernize their IVR systems. And the reason why that is getting such significant investments is that there's an easily demonstrable ROI for doing that modernization. The name of the game with IVRs is call deflection. So, how many people can they help with the IVR and prevent from needing to talk to a person?
Right.
And so if you can measurably increase the call deflection, as well as, better integrate the system with your current modern, DevOps pipeline, as well as improve your customer's experience, that is something that has tangible impact that companies are happy to make investments for. And, even today, we see Twilio, I think, is the most common one that we do work with, but Google and Amazon have great options. And even today, I saw Microsoft revealed an Azure version of that same capability.
Yeah.
And so, it is, it's perhaps, when you think about it initially, because everybody has had frustrating experiences with IVRs. So when you think about it initially, you have some of that, some of that negative connotation in the back of your mind. Yeah. But the potential for really having an extraordinary impact on your users and extraordinary impact on your business is very much present with the IVR space.
Which, again, I think is really interesting because if you consider they're probably, and maybe I'm wrong here, I don't, of course, have any stats or data in front of me, but I still feel like there's probably more people who use IVR systems on a day-to-day than probably other voice-type systems. Am I making too big of an assumption there? Or?
No, I would think that's absolutely the case globally, and I too don't have the statistics, but I would think that domestically that is that would be the case as well.
Because you think about it, when you call in, to anywhere, whether that be a government office, again, say your telecom company, your cable company. I mean, even sometimes when you call in to order food, the IVR systems are everywhere.
Oh yeah.
So that's why I'm thinking about it. I'm like, that may be the case still, where more people are still, again, I'd love to do some more research into that potentially, but how many people are still using more, interactive voice response systems versus, voice assistants kind of as we have in the day in the form of Alexa, Google Assistant, other third-party ones. So yeah, I agree with you. I think there's a huge market for IVR, and that's really interesting. You're still kind of seeing a lot of investment happening in that space, and it seems like you guys are focusing on IVR with Bespoken as well. So
Yeah, it's a really, really interesting use cases that we see in the IVR space, and typically very, very different types of companies that are making those investments than the companies that are making Alexa skills and Google Actions.
Absolutely. So then, Emerson, as we wind down this really interesting conversation we've had here, I always like to end on this question, if possible. What is one thing that you think someone can do today to begin leveraging voice technology, either personally or within their organization?
So for personally, my biggest recommendation is get one of the devices and start playing with it yourself. And test out popular big name skills, test out perhaps your competitors' products, test out ones that are made by individual developers that are very silly. Get a feel for what it's like to interact in a conversational manner with these platforms on a regular basis, not just one and done. And then obviously take notes about what stands out, how you feel. From a professional standpoint, or from within your organization, trying to get them to leverage and adopt voice, my biggest recommendation would be to read everything. So there is so much. Yeah. There's so much good content out there. The VoiceBot stuff, Bradley or Sklar Publishing, Dr. Terry Fisher with the Alexa Canada, so much good, I would say more informal content out there. And then just a ton of stellar books from our friends in the voice space. Kathy Pearl's Designing Voice User Interfaces is always one of the first ones that I recommend to people that are new to the space. Scott and Susan Westwater put out a book on voice strategy recently, which is phenomenal. And those are great things, I think, to read, before you would try to make your case or before you try to create a design or anything. Yeah. But then once you have some buy-in, there are even things like Heidi Culbertson and Micah Coppins put out a voice UX workbook, which is, an incredibly useful blueprint worksheet guide for how you should think about what the design looks like, what the voice user experience looks like, and really is almost takes away a lot of that design complexity that either prohibits people from getting into voice or causes people to get into voice, but to put out some skills that perhaps don't properly reflect the brand identity.
Yeah, no, I think those are excellent tips for both the personal side and the organizational side, and definitely the point you mentioned about digesting all this information, because I think that's the biggest thing all of us who work in this industry encounter as we talk with anybody outside of it, is most people don't really know what's going on. And in order to really understand what's going on, the first step is to just dive headfirst in the industry. And there's so many good books out there, so much information. You really don't have to look far. If you're trying to figure out how to leverage this for your organization, to at least just get a high level understanding before you maybe talk to somebody in the space to go a bit deeper. So no, I think those are excellent tips. And again, if you're somebody listening to this who's definitely interested in learning more about the voice industry, voice technology, doesn't know where to begin, Emerson's tips are really a good place to start. So, but Emerson,
it's also great.
Oh, go ahead.
It's also great. Perhaps it was this way in the early days of mobile, although I was a little young to get right at the beginning of that. But it's amazing that these incredible world-class experts are friendly, responsive, and extraordinarily willing to help. And so, you could be reading voice strategy and you say, hey, I really wonder what Susan Westwater would think of a particular idea or question. And I don't want to cite Susan everything, but I'm sure that she would respond. And it's not unique to her. It really is just a delightful thing about the voice industry, how everybody is nerdy and excited about what's going on, and everybody wants to help and learn. It's wonderful.
I agree 100%. And having the pleasure of knowing Scott and Susan personally, I can 100% vouch for them and say, yes, if you reached out to them for anything, they would set up a meeting with you like in 5 seconds. So, but Emerson, this has been an amazing conversation. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me. And if anybody wanted to get in touch with you, what are some of the best ways they can go about doing so?
Sure, yeah, you can check us out at bespoken.io. I am on Twitter and LinkedIn, both at Emerson Sklar, at my name. And yeah, we, again, would love to help people on any part of their voice journey.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much again, Emerson. I'm excited to keep collaborating, the work we're doing in the OVN and also future projects. I know for sure as we get some bigger projects coming up here under our belt, I will be in touch with you about please, I don't want to keep bashing my head against the desk anymore.
Sounds perfect.
Sounds good. Well, we'll chat soon and take care.
Yeah, have a great day.
Artificial
Intelligence.
voice recognition, machine learning.
Robotics.
You've been listening to the Artificial Podcast with your host, Nick Myers. To stay up to date with all our latest episodes, you can subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, and Google Podcasts. To learn more about how your organization can benefit by unlocking the power of AI and voice, visit www.redfox-ai.com. Until next time.